The world has just called Vladimir Putin's bluff, and the panic is starting to show. For months, the Kremlin tried to use nuclear intimidation as a weapon of diplomacy, but this time the performance appeared to collapse publicly. Putin's latest nuclear stunt was meant to frighten Washington into easing sanctions. Instead, it exposed just how fragile Russia's power play has become. It started with a desperate lie. Putin ordered a test of what he called a nuclear cruise missile, claiming it could travel over 14,000 kilometers and evade every US defense system. Within hours, Russian state TV aired fiery discussions about how these missiles could destroy Washington, Chicago, Seattle, and Los Angeles. The messaging was clear. Russia was threatening to erase American cities. But then, something didn't add up. Norway's radiation monitoring agency confirmed there was no sign of nuclear activity near the Arctic Circle, where the launch supposedly happened. No radiation meant no nuclear engine. In other words, Moscow's claim was false. The illusion of power vanished overnight, and President Trump responded publicly, reminding Putin that the United States maintains the world's largest nuclear arsenal. He warned that if Moscow wanted to resume testing, America could do the same, on a much larger scale. The reaction inside the Kremlin was immediate and humiliating. The same officials who had just bragged about hitting American cities suddenly changed their tone. Putin's spokesperson abruptly claimed the launch was not nuclear after all. The climb down was as swift as it was awkward. At home, the propaganda machine scrambled to save face. Kremlin commentators went back on air, vowing to finally strike with full might if isolated. "We'll wipe everything off the face of the earth," one anchor shouted. They described this mysterious missile as capable of circling the planet before striking targets like Kiev or US cities thousands of miles away. But reality told a different story. The test didn't work. Putin had promised a revolutionary nuclear-powered missile with unlimited range. He even claimed it flew for 15 hours and traveled over 9,000 miles. The only proof offered was a low-resolution animation broadcast on Russian TV. The footage appeared to be illustrative animation rather than test footage or a military test. And there was a reason for that. Real footage didn't exist. The last two times Russia tested the same missile, the nuclear engine failed almost immediately, once after 5 seconds and another after 13. Both times the missile crashed before leaving Russian territory. This time appears no different. If the missile had actually been nuclear-powered, radiation would have been detected by neighboring countries within hours. Norway and other monitoring agencies reported none. They confirmed a launch occurred, but not a nuclear one. Russia, once again, was bluffing. The purpose behind the test was clear: to frighten Washington and sway American public opinion. But that psychological warfare fell flat. As one analyst joked, Putin's missiles are like Russian cars, lots of smoke, no movement. And this time, all that smoke has blown back into the Kremlin's own face. When asked about Russia's supposed breakthrough, President Trump dismissed it with calm precision. "They know we have a nuclear submarine, the greatest in the world, right off their shore," he said. "We don't need to go 8,000 miles. He called Putin's behavior inappropriate and urged him to end the war that should have taken 1 week, but is now in its 4th year. It was a measured but unmistakable warning. The US doesn't need threats, it already has deterrence. But Putin wasn't finished. The very next day, he tried another performance. This time he claimed success with a Poseidon nuclear torpedo, an underwater drone supposedly powered by a miniature reactor. "This is a huge success," Putin declared. "Poseidon's power exceeds even our most promising Sarmat intercontinental missile." For those keeping track, this was déjà vu. Putin had already boasted in 2023 that Poseidon was entering combat duty. Now, 2 years later, he was saying the exact same thing. The contradiction was hard to ignore. The truth is, Russia's defense budget is shrinking under sanctions. The Kremlin faces constraints that complicate consistent messaging. For Putin, these nuclear announcements are one of the last tools he has left to project strength, but they are not landing anymore. As the US reminded the world of its own deterrent, the dynamic shifted. President Trump released a statement emphasizing that America still holds the world's largest and most modernized nuclear stockpile, a stockpile updated and renovated during his first term. "Because of the tremendous destructive power, I hated to do it," he wrote, but had no choice. He pointed out that Russia ranks second and China a distant third, warning that US testing might resume on an equal basis if others continue theirs. He framed the message as deterrence rather than a threat. Mutually assured destruction, the cornerstone of nuclear stability, works only when both sides understand each other's capabilities. When one side pretends to have power, it doesn't. The other reminds it what real power looks like. The US never let its arsenal decay. Even as Russia went bankrupt in the 1990s, America maintained and upgraded its warheads. History offers proof that this approach works. During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev tried to deploy missiles to Cuba. President Kennedy responded with a naval blockade and a clear message. If Cuba launched, the US would strike back at the Soviet Union itself. The USSR withdrew the missiles. They pulled their missiles out. Moscow has always respected strength, not compromise. And that's exactly what played out again in 2025. Hours after Trump's statement, Putin's press secretary scrambled to walk back the entire episode. If President Trump was referring to the Burevestnik missile, that is by no means a nuclear test, he said. All countries develop defense systems, but this was not a nuclear test. He warned vaguely that Russia would act accordingly if the US broke the moratorium, but the defensive tone was obvious. So before America reminded them of its power, Russia bragged about an unmatched missile with unlimited range. After the reminder, they insisted it wasn't even nuclear. The narrative collapsed in real time. Now, critics in Washington voiced concern that restarting any form of testing could break decades of nuclear restraint. And they have a point. Since the early 2000s, most nuclear powers have avoided live detonations. That arrangement benefits the US the most. It locks in America's advantage. Our warheads are not only the largest in number, but the most reliable. If testing resumes globally, it gives China an excuse to catch up. But Trump's wording was careful. He said testing would be on an equal basis, meaning if Russia continues experimenting with nuclear-powered weapons, the US might match that category, not detonate live bombs. It's deterrence, not escalation. Back in Moscow, panic bled into ridicule. Russian television hosts launched into bizarre rants about US officials, showing how shaken they were. One show mocked US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who had just publicly dismantled a Russian talking point on live American TV. When asked about Putin's envoy, Kirill Dmitriev, who was touring the US, claiming sanctions wouldn't hurt Russia, Bessent was blunt. "What else is he supposed to say?" he asked. "If he goes back home and admits it's terrible, what do you think will happen to him?" He pointed out that Russian oil revenues were already down 20% year over year and could drop another 30% under the new sanctions. "They haven't immunized the economy," he said. "This is a maximum pressure campaign, and it's working." That response triggered outrage on Russian television. Anchors accused Bessent of systemic hatred and even resorted to personal attacks about his private life. The desperation was clear. When propaganda fails, insults follow. But the exchange revealed something deeper. Moscow's propaganda war was losing its international audience. Russian officials were flying into Washington to threaten nuclear strikes, and then crying disrespect when challenged. The message was simple. If you don't want to be called out, stop using nuclear blackmail as a political weapon. That's why these moments matter. When Western officials push back publicly, it stops misinformation from snowballing into fear. If unchallenged, these threats spread online, fuel panic, and pressure democracies into softening policies toward Russia. For the Kremlin, that's the real battlefield: information. Because on the ground, Russia can't win militarily. So it's fighting with headlines, sound bites, and state TV monologues. The nuclear bluff was meant to create psychological leverage. Instead, it reminded the world that Russia's strongest weapon is still deception. The channel directs viewers to its platform for extended coverage, long-form documentaries, and expert breakdowns. These are the details that don't make it to mainstream screens. Understanding how information wars are fought is crucial, because today, the most dangerous weapon isn't just a missile, it's a lie repeated enough times to sound true. Putin's nuclear threats may once have sparked fear, but today the illusion is crumbling. The world isn't buying the bluff anymore. The only question left is, when the fear stops working, what does Moscow try next?